All right, it is a little bit past 6:45, but we'll go ahead and get started at 6:53. Welcome to the June 8th Cedar Springs Public Schools School Board meeting. And I'll call the meeting to order, and if we will rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. And the next item is a roll call. Secretary Slager, if we could have that, please.
Yes. Trustee Bowser?
Here.
Trustee Vanderhyde?
Here.
Treasurer Gilmore?
Here.
Secretary Slager? Here. Vice President Schaffner?
Here. Here.
President Reed?
Here.
And Trustee Rivard has a planned absence.
That's correct. Thank you. We have established a quorum, so therefore we will move on to our adoption of the agenda, and I'll entertain a motion.
So moved. Second. Support.
We have a motion by Vanderhyde, supported by, was it Misty? Yep, Misty, to approve the agenda as presented. Is there any discussion? Having none, Vice President Schaffner?
Yes.
Secretary Slager?
Yes.
Treasurer Gilmore?
Yes.
Trustee Vanderhyde?
Yes.
Trustee Bowser?
Yes.
President Reed? Yes. The agenda is therefore adopted. And that brings us to gratitudes. Who would like to share a gratitude?
So I was thankful for the teachers finding unique ways to make the end of the school year for the students. So I got a chance to see two variations of that. Very moved by both of them. So a personalized letter sent home for my daughter from her teacher. And then the other one was the virtual parade, I guess, where the parents got to drive through and wave and talk. So that was interesting, and the kids were talking about that. And people were decorating. I saw decorated vehicles and kids hanging out the windows waving at their teachers. And just given this current situation, just the unique ways the teachers have reached out to really show that they care, support, and love our kids. Pretty moving for me. I'm really thankful for our teachers and our administrators' uniqueness, finding ways to connect the community even despite the current limitations.
So I'll piggyback on that and just quick say I was grateful. We did a couple of those goodbye parades too, and we also crashed the one at Cedar View because my 7-year-old really wanted to go through. And so even though I didn't actually have a Cedar View student, I was grateful that they still waved and smiled and said, have a great summer, even though I probably confused them. But I just also wanted to add, I'm grateful that football is starting right now. High school football, it's looking a little different and they can't do as much, but I'm grateful that they're 7 to 8 tonight over at the Red Hawk Stadium getting started.
I want to say I'm grateful for the parents that are reaching out to us and sharing their thoughts for the fall, their happiness, or even their concerns for the work that we did to finish up the school year. But it's been all good input and we appreciate it all. And I'm grateful for all of those reach outs.
Yeah, and I'm just thankful for the can-do spirit that's embracing this work. It's not easy. We knew it wouldn't be easy, but people are giving grace and just have that optimistic sense that we're going to get better and learn from what we've done and just continue to do everything we can to engage with our students, whatever that may look like in the fall.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Okay, we'll move on to our consent agenda, and I'll entertain a motion for as presented.
So moved.
Support.
We have a motion by Vanderhyde, supported by Slager, to approve the consent agenda as presented. So I'll call the roll. Vice President Schaffner,
Yes.
Secretary Slager,
Yes.
Treasurer Gilmore, are you there? Yes?
Yeah, I said, yeah, I did.
Okay.
Yep.
Trustee Vanderhyde,
Yes. Yes.
Trustee Bowser,
Yes.
President Reed, yes. Consent agenda is approved as presented. Bringing us to our discussion items. And first up, we have the financial update with Mr. Chris LaHaye.
All right, thank you so much, President Reed. We'll start off with my Director of Finance, Chief Financial Officer agenda here. So your year-to-date budget update was included in your board packet, and that is attached. If you have any questions, please reach out. But I will be giving you plenty of budget updates this evening, so I won't go into that any further at this point in time. My second thing here is, despite the multitude of unknowns surrounding K-12 education right now, I will be providing you with both the 2019-2020 final budgets and the initial 2020-2021 budgets for your consideration to be adopted at our next work session meeting on June 22nd. And as you are accustomed to, we will have our annual L4029 tax request form. I will give a very brief presentation on that for adoption at the next meeting as well. And then the last thing for my report tonight is the investment income that I've been reporting on. You can see we're still earning despite the downturn in the markets, and our aggregate rate is down to 0.65%. As I was putting this together, I can remember a year ago we were around 2.5%. So it's just crazy how that's fallen, but still worth our time to invest those funds and keep an accurate cash flow so we can do that. So you notice that the debt service fund has sunk exponentially this month. The reason for that is we sent out almost all of our debt service funds for our May 1st debt payments. So that's why that dollar amount is only $523. That is my report.
Okay. Thank you. Any questions? Okay. We'll move on to item B, the 2019-2020 final budget with Chris LaHaye.
All right, thank you so much. Let me get my presentation up here. All right, can everybody see that presentation?
Yes.
First time
Yep.
I've ever done a final budget presentation in this light, so bear with me if it's a little clunky, but this is our final budget presentation for the 2019-2020 school year. And there we go. It didn't want to go. There we go. So we must publish a notice of a budget hearing. That's actually in anticipation for our June 22nd meeting. But the language is here, and I wanted to put it on my presentation, be it further resolved that the total revenues and unappropriated fund balance estimate to be available for appropriation in the general fund of the school district for the 2019-2020 school year, which includes 17.9172 mil of ad valorem taxes to be levied on non-homestead and non-qualified agricultural property to be used for operating purposes only. So that is the basis of our general fund budget hearing. And that's pursuant to our board policy 6230, which I will not read to you. So before we get into the revenues and the things that we will talk about that are unknowns, one thing we do know is our enrollment history. So just a brief enrollment history, which I know you are all accustomed to, but this has all been a learning process for me as I've acclimated myself to Cedar Springs Public Schools, is our pretty consistent enrollment. We've seen a nice uptick in the recent years, and that continued this year. So our final fall enrollment was 3,577 pupils. Foundation allowance history, and we'll talk about this in a little bit more because for the first time in quite some time, we're uncertain about what our foundation allowance will look like. So I'll reference back to this graph throughout the evening, but you can see, and I'm sure memory will serve, that our foundation allowance per pupil funding has grown nicely over the last 8 years or so. And we were, and still are, to the best of our knowledge, receiving $8,111 per pupil for the 2019-2020 school year at the current time. So I know you guys have seen this before, and this was my revenue proration. So I came to you at a board meeting, I believe in April or early May, and said, we're not going to see a proration this school year. You know, the executive order has come out and said if we continue to pay our employees, we will continue to receive our full state funding. We've since realized that that statement is in great jeopardy. So there's a very good chance of a proration, as I know I've told you in the past, and I'll talk about that a little bit more on the next slide. But this is my best calculation of how I came to the numbers in which I will use for my budget this evening. So to go through this spreadsheet, and I won't take you through each line, but basically the state revenues, and these numbers came from the May 15th Consensus Revenue Estimating Conference. So this happened after I last spoke to you at the May board meeting, because we did not have the late board meeting. But essentially the Revenue Estimating Conference came out and said total school aid fund revenue was going to be 14, that's actually 14 billion, 14.966 billion, because those are in millions of dollars for this school year. And again, those revenues are coming in at all times because they're predicated on taxes and a lot of other things which we've spoken about. The issue there is that the school aid fund expenditures are 15.862 billion. So we are upside down by $896 million. That's the total shortfall for the current 19-20 school year. And I don't know if you can see my cursor. If we were in a boardroom, I would point a laser at it or have some way of showing you. But that's this number right here, $896 million short in the school aid fund. If you split that over the number of students in the state, we are coming up with a shortfall per student of $613 for the current year. And if we use the same numbers and roll them over to next year with the Consensus Revenue Estimating Conference numbers, we would be coming up to $662 shorter per pupil. And what I mean by that is that's a decrease, that's a subtraction from the $8,111 per pupil that we were told we would be receiving this year. So any questions about those numbers or anything that you'd like to ask me at that point as I fly through this, where that's coming from? I can only see a few of you, so go ahead and speak up. All right, I'll continue on. For the reasons of this budget, and I did this in speaking with several of my colleagues, I guess I'm a little bit optimistic, and I had the conversation with Mr. Smith earlier today. I decided to use a proration amount for this year of $550 per student, and then I kept that same amount for next year. And the reason I did that is because there's still, a chance we won't receive a proration. There's some districts that are not budgeting a proration at all for this year and then budgeting for next year. But there's a rainy day fund. There are a lot of different, there's a possibility of a federal bailout. And I thought, man, that can potentially help out a little bit and get us back to a number of 550. That's where I came up with that. So throughout these budgets, and I'll reference it over and over again, $550 less per student than what we had budgeted previously is what I had settled upon. Now, we're not approving these budgets tonight. So I'd like to have a brief discussion with the board after I'm all set here and see if you're comfortable with that. Because if you would like that number to be different, I can easily make that change and bring that to you for the June 22nd adoption budget. So keep that in mind as we run along. The approximate cut to the budget for each year, just under $2 million. So a little bit about a proration. And again, these are things I wouldn't typically include in a budget hearing, but I wanted to make sure everybody understood the process. So state law requires if the total amount appropriated from the school aid fund, and that would be expenditures, exceeds the amount of revenue that's actually deposited into the fund. Again, that's coming in there in full time, then the state must prorate payments. Absolutely must. It's state law. So the Department of Treasury, here's how that works. You may have heard of this 30-day notification. The Department of Treasury determines if a shortfall exists and notifies the state budget director, who then must provide the 30-day notice to the legislature that we are going to prorate school aid funding to the districts. So during that 30-day period, the legislature can then take alternative action. They can either pull from the general fund, they can pull from that rainy day fund that had about $1.2 billion. Maybe they know something's coming from the federal government. We're not exactly sure at this point, but those are all things that can happen under that 30-day window. Today, on June 8th, 2020, that 30-day notice has not been sent to the legislature. Okay, so we've already received we haven't received our June state aid payment yet, but it's been posted that it is coming, and it comes on June 20th. So that would only leave the July and August state aid payments in which they could prorate from. So at this point, the consensus was that if there was going to be proration, it would be announced along the same time as that May 15th consensus revenue estimating conference. Didn't happen, and now we're several weeks past that. So quite interesting. One thing I also wanted to throw in here, a little good news. I just caught this article yesterday. This is from CNBC. And I'll read it briefly. I don't want to take up everybody's whole night, but so I don't know if anybody, has been reading about the unemployment numbers, but what came out of May absolutely astonished a lot of people, because the consensus forecast called for payrolls to drop by 8.3 million in the month of May, and the unemployment rate to dip down to about 19.5%. What actually happened is May's payroll increased by 2.5 million. It was the largest increase on record, and the unemployment rate fell to 13.3% from a previous 14.7% in April. So I know this graph is kind of misleading. It goes all the way back to 1945, but if you look at that way far end over here, in April 2020, there was $20.7 million loss in jobs. And then in May 2020, there was an increase of 2.5 million. So it really threw things for a loop. Maybe that's a sign that things will not be as bad as everybody has predicted. Just a glimmer of hope there. I thought I'd throw that in. All right, so now to what would typically look like a regular budget hearing. So I presented you with two scenarios tonight, and we can discuss which one. The first one, the top, these are my revenues if there is no proration. So if I can go through this, the 2019-20 Amendment 1 here, those are the numbers you saw at the February 24th board meeting when Jeff Malik presented his amendment. So then in the next column here is my final budget if there is no proration, and then down here is my final budget if there's a $550 proration, all right, per pupil. So our revenues would be up by a positive change of $430,000 over the amendment budget if we receive no proration. If we do receive that proration, our revenues will be down 1.5 million. So I'll talk about this in detail, but I'm going to go through and present you with two scenarios. I will typically speak on the prorated scenario, as I think that is most likely. Questions about this slide or anything with revenues that I've gone over so far? All right.
No.
Feel free to stop me at any time. Pie chart of where our revenues come from. This is obligatory. I've got to show you guys this. Obviously, most of our revenues come from the state. So that's the scary part. That's where we're looking at the proration from. We get some federal funding. We get incoming transfers from other school districts and those things. And then, of course, the local revenue from our non-homestead millage tax collection is only 7%. So almost 80% of our revenue comes directly from the state of Michigan. So what are our revenue budget variances coming off from that amendment? Local revenue. There's a $62,000 reduction in non-homestead property tax revenue. The reason for that is I'm not quite sure where Jeff's budget was coming from there, but as I ran through the final numbers, $60,000 reduction there. We had an $18,000 reduction in interest revenue, and that's because rates have plummeted in our MyLAF fund, in our investments. And then an $80,000 reduction in athletic admission gate receipts. I have to show you that because it is a significant change from our amended budget. The reason for that is don't know if there's any two ways to say it. There was an error in that amended budget. Boys basketball gate receipts should have been $9,000. It was 90. So that little extra zero reflected as some extra revenue in that February amendment. I'm not trying to throw anybody under the bus, but I had to fix that. So that's reflected as a local revenue negative variance accordingly. So, well, $80,000 there. Good news is the money was actually never there. State revenue. There was a $37,000 increase in MIPSER's 147E. We receive money from the state to help with the extremely high retirement costs. We received a $37,000 increase there. $21,000 decrease in at-risk revenue. That's just simply because our revenue has to match our expense for those grant funds. So because of COVID, we ended up spending a little bit less. It has to be reflected as we get a little bit less revenue as well, because it has to match. And we received $36,000 more from the Kent ISD just because of lapsed funds, which are funds that are held back. And then if they're not expensed, we receive them. They gave us a lapsed fund payment this year, which there's no way we could have known about that in February. And then there was a $21,000 increase in our state police safety grant revenue. And that's just another, had to match the expense. Same thing as at-risk funding. Federal revenue, there was a $74,000 increase in Title II funds. And that's just because with the title grants, with the federal grants, our general ledger budget has to match what we submit to the state. And when I came in and looked at the budget, it did not. So I had to bring that up. Otherwise, if we have a title audit years down the road, that would be a significant deficiency and we would have to answer that, which I do not want to do. So that was raised up to match the application. And then of course, the ESSER funds that we received as a result of COVID-19. Again, our allocation was $281,000, but we are only going to spend around $222,000 for this fiscal year. The rest will be deferred to next fiscal year. So that had to be added to the federal revenue, and it's also federal expense. And then of course, there's incoming transfers and others. We had quite a few increases here, and these were just because we received moving targets from the Kent ISD. So we ended up receiving $91,000 more in revenue via Act 18 funds. That's special education revenue that we get through the district or the intermediate school district. $24,000 increase in enhancement millage revenue. $38,000 more in payments from other school districts, and that comes in the form of, we have the center programs for different special ed programs, and then we're reimbursed by the local districts for students that are in those programs. And then $55,000 increase in Medicaid reimbursements. So it's kind of a challenge for me to talk about any of those because I wasn't here for that amended budget, but in the process of going through and shoring everything up, these are the variances that I found in the budget. Questions about any of those? It's tough on Zoom, you guys. I can't see the smile on your faces. Okay, so then we'll go to the expenses. Again, when you compare our expenses to that February amendment that happened right before COVID-19 to our final expenses, you'll notice in the dollar change, you guys know the parenthesis means a negative, okay? And the reason is a lot of our expenses went down, and I'll explain why, but I'm sure you know a lot of those reasons. A lot of our expenses went down as a result of closing school for nearly 3 months. So let me back up to that real quick. In total, if you look at the amendment versus our final expenses for the year, it's almost $1.3 million. And some of that is some variance in the budgeting, but some is also a result of the closure. So I'll go through each type of program here and explain where I found the variances, and I'll try to do it as quickly as I possibly can. So obviously when school's closed, we don't have substitute teachers. We paid our long-term subs, and our floating subs that are consistently in the district. But people aren't taking sick days, people aren't taking personal days, so therefore we don't need day-to-day subs. About a $30,000 savings there. $32,000 reduction in wages. Now we continue to pay our employees, but we didn't have after-school programs. We didn't have a lot of those little extra things, so we saved some wages there. $110,000 reduction in benefits, and that was primarily in retirement costs. So when I came in, one of the first things I did was shore up all of our retirement costs. And basically, the state gives us about $1.2 million per year, and we have to go around and send that right back out to the MIPSers, to the pension system. But we have to attach it to the wages of every employee in order to do that. So it goes through payroll. And so when I shored up that fund, we were around $170,000 off. So I went ahead and did a calculation on that. And so that was a reduction in cost and compared to the previous amendment. $86,000 reduction in supplies and materials. We basically kind of stopped all spending as soon as COVID hit because the kids weren't in the buildings and just focused on the remote learning plan. And then there was a $35,000 reduction in tuition payments to the Kent Innovation High School and My School Kent programs. Added needs, that's special and compensatory ed. There was just a reduction in sub-cost benefits and then regional special ed program billings. Again, those were just adjusted to be the actuals. Pupil services, so those are things such as nurse, social workers, psychologists. $10,000 reduction in health services. We didn't have a nurse, and the Spectrum did not bill us for the fourth quarter, so we had a reduction there. And then there was a $50,000 variance there, a reduction because we had a social worker resign at one point during the year, and that wasn't accounted for, as far as I could tell. Instructional staff services. These are professional development opportunities for staff, things such as that. We had a budget increase there because of that Title II allocation. I told you on the revenue side, I had to make it match the consolidated application. So that shows as an increase here as well. And then general administration, again, that's district office administration. There was a $20,000 reduction to the Board of Ed funds for purchase services, and that was election costs. So I don't know if that was just budgeted a little high, but if memory serves, the budget for the amendment was about $60,000 in amendment or election costs, and it came in at about $40,000. So there was a reduction there. Should I stop? Any questions at this point?
For me.
Okay. Thanks, Matt.
Chris, I think that budget amendment may have been because we didn't have the election in May.
Oh, you know what, Scott? You're very right.
Yep.
You're very right. Although you'll see for the next year budget, I'm so confident that we're going to pass it. It's not in the budget. Because if the budget, if the bond passes, obviously, then you can have those election costs come out of the bond proceeds. Anyways, I digress. For just
Thinking about that I think you're thinking about that the right way.
That's right. You know, you got to will things to happen. Thank you. So school administration.
I like
again,
the confidence.
Small variances in wages and benefits, nothing significant. And then again, unspent funds for supplies and workshops due to just not finishing out the school year there. Business services, there were no significant changes there. Operations and maintenance, obviously there were some significant reductions just because we weren't operating buildings, not billions. $53,000 in maintenance staff expense because we worked with GRBS and they really staffed things nicely and saved us some money there. Other purchase services, supplies and utilities, natural gas, electricity, not having the buildings open. And then Kent Sheriff's Department, actually, I emailed them when they billed us for March and I said, are we, obviously our officer can be reallocated elsewhere if possible. And so they did, and they didn't bill us for the rest of the year. So, but they will be back next year. So we had a reduction there. Dean Transportation's contract was reduced per the contract to 60% of previous costs. So that saved us around $375,000. And then support services, there was a $27,000 reduction due to the wages and benefits variation there. And then I probably don't need to go through each one of these with you guys, but athletics, we had some small reductions. Obviously, we paid all of our coaches. I added Title I expenditures to community services, again, to make it match the app, and we have to work with private schools that our district students go to. It's a small amount, $7,000 or $8,000. And then the building and site funds had to increase the expense related to the school safety grant, which you saw on the revenue side. And then outgoing transfers and other, that really is just a way of accounting for our copy machine lease. So there really was no changes there. Little pie chart here for your basic programs being the biggest part. So this just goes through our pie chart of where our different expenses lie in aggregate. So obviously we're spending most of our money on basic programs, or the largest share, and that's the teachers and that's the buildings right there with kids. So really looks about the same as it always has in the past. The pieces of the puzzle or the pie get a little smaller, or get a lot smaller, as you get further away from the students, direct instruction and added needs. So that's the way that should look. Any questions about the expense pie or any parts of that budget so far?
No?
Okay, thank you. And then just to show you guys this, I won't run through this with as much detail, but just to show you as a district, you want to have, obviously most of your expense is going to be tied into people. We're a people business, we're a customer service business, and that's right where we lie. So there was a reduction, obviously, in our expenses, but it was pretty much across the board. The one place that there was not a reduction was in capital outlay, and I can explain that here in a moment. But roughly 74% of all of our expenses go to people's salary and benefits. And then the next biggest piece of the pie there, purchase services, is also people. That's your substitute teachers and things of that nature. So right around 84% goes to employing the people that work with our kids. I guess I didn't break that down by that. So that is the different parts of it. Now, if you go to the board book, this is your one-page budget sheet. So I present you with two different, where does this get us, right? So there's two different budget sheets here. And I give you 3 columns, and this is very similar to what you've seen in the past with Mr. Malik. Back in our younger days, we worked on a lot of these things together, so it's always great to see where he's gone. I like to put a little bit more color in mine, put some logos on it, that kind of thing. But anyways, so on here you have your original budget in blue, you have the amendment in yellow, and then in a pinkish orangish color there is our June 8th, 2020 final budget. So this would be the final budget if there were no proration. So if the state comes out and says, we're not going to prorate, we're going to give you $8,111 per pupil this year, and that's what you as a board wanted to adopt on June 22nd, if you come all the way down here to the bottom, our revenues would exceed our expenditures this year by $1,916,798. No proration. That would drive our fund balance to $9.2 million, and as a percentage of expenditures, it would be just north of 24%. And that's the result of no proration and, of course, a decreased expenditures as a result of COVID-19. So that is option A for budget adoption. Option B would be to go with the $550 proration, which again, I still feel like is conservative at this point. If we were to take that proration and adopt a budget based on a $550 proration, follow it right down to the same point, revenues actually would be, well, expenditures would exceed revenues by $46,000. We would nearly have a balanced budget. And that would still give us a fund balance of 7.2, almost $7.3 million, and a fund balance just south of 19%. So that is option B. Option C would be to prorate even further. Obviously, the expenditure side is done. Over the next 2 weeks, I will update expenditures as I can finalize numbers, as last little details come in. For the most part, expenditures are set for this school year. So that's a discussion that we will need to have, what you as a board are comfortable with adopting on June 22. Any questions about either of these scenarios?
Is there a deadline that they have to communicate to us? Prorate or don't prorate?
So that's a great question. There's not a deadline per se. The state's budget year ends September 30th. So I guess the deadline would be, before our August state aid payment, when they could go and pull whatever they need to pull back. So that would, if they follow that 30-day rule, it would have to happen around July 20th that they would announce that. But yeah, I mean, once we get past August 20th, if they still haven't pulled any proration, we've received all of our money from the state for this fiscal year. So even though our fiscal year ends June 30th, we still take those July and August state aid payments and accrue them back to this fiscal year. So it's going to be interesting.
The other question yeah. I had, I know you said your recommendation was the proration partial. If I got that right. What's the negative to doing it without proration, other than it shows a higher percentage fund balance? Do you think it sends the wrong message while we're going for a bond, or what's your thinking? What's your thinking there?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, at face value, just in a traditional sense, if if my final budget, if the final budget we adopt, if my revenues exceed what actually comes in, so after we receive all of our revenues and we make all of our year-end entries in preparation for the budget, if this budget that we adopt, the revenues exceed our actual revenues, we'll get a letter from Treasury and have to explain why there was a variance. So there's really nothing that happens. I would have to write an explanation that this is what happened. And this year, there's probably going to be quite a few of those letters. I've actually heard some talk that they might do away with that practice for this year, depending on the timing, because nobody really knows right now. And as I said, there's a lot of districts that are not budgeting a proration for this year. As far as the message it sends, that's a good discussion to have. I'm not sure. I think that adopting a proration sends the message that we think there's a really good chance that it's going to happen, and we're trying to be, as prepared as possible. But other than that, I'm not sure what message it sends to the community. That's a good discussion item for sure.
Hi, this is Matt.
Hey, Matt.
Can you talk a little bit about if we do kind of go down this road of adopting with the, as you had recommended?
Yep.
If they don't prorate or take money away from us, what then? What happens?
Well, so if they don't take money away from us and we adopted a budget that had a proration of $550 per pupil, then I would just have a really, really big budget variance. I mean, typically a variance of 1% to 2% is recognized as acceptable, and obviously that would be quite a bit of a magnitude greater than that. But as far as if that happens, I mean, the bottom line is this: there's only so much money in the bank being the school aid fund, right? And so if they somehow figure out a way to fully fund the $8,111 per pupil this year, conventional wisdom would tell you that they're going to have to take more per pupil next year, right? Instead of $550 or $650, they might have to take $1,200 and make our foundation allowance right around $7,000 per pupil for next year. Or there could be some type of federal bailout. We're not exactly sure what would happen, but locally what would happen, we would just have a budget variance, and our fund balance would come in much better than what the budget adopted said it would. So
Would that budget variance affect our credits in the future when they do audits or anything of that nature?
Nope, another great question. Absolutely not. With on those S&P rating calls, they don't really look at budget variances. They just look at they look at the community, the proximity to large cities. They look at demographics, everything, but they also look at the fund balance overall. So technically, it could help. From that standpoint, the bigger the fund balance, the better, because it just basically says the district's in better financial shape. But they don't look at, I've never had a question where they look at budget variances. No. And that's just partially because, school personnel turnover. And so, they're not going to hold that against us. But they do look at, enrollment history, fund balance history of how healthy the district has been and how well the district has been a steward of public funds. Yep. right? I'm gonna.
So I guess, Chris,
Yeah.
yeah, you said you wanted to kind of know where everybody was at if they were comfortable. I guess I'd be comfortable going because it's down to a guessing game. But like you said, there's only so many dollars in the pot. So personally, I defer to your expertise, and I think it's probably wise to be a little conservative and forecast, like you said, 550. So I'm comfortable with that. I don't know how everybody else feels about it.
I'll chime in. I kind of echo the same sentiment. I kind of lean towards the conservative approach. I think it looks better on paper actually to kind of go this route. That way we're not seemingly benefiting from COVID-19.
I agree with that, Matt. I really do. Yep. I think that's certainly some truth in that. And honestly, it's possible that it might be better to actually make it 650. I'm going to keep my ear to everything I can in the next week and bring you the best possible, information I have on June 22. And maybe we'll get something more definitive that it's going to be 650 or 300. Who knows? We don't know at this point, but boy, I will do everything in my power to get you the best estimate possible. Okay. Thank you, guys. I'm going to see what else we have here. Now, just a little bit about fund balance history. Again, in a typical year, these would be the things that we would focus on. But obviously, this is a new and different time. So fund balance has been healthy. These are the things that, S&P Global Ratings really look at when we have those bond rating calls. And this is really great. Typically a fund balance 10 to 12% and above shows that the district is healthy and a good steward of public money. So that's something that would certainly be smiled upon there. And again, I should say 18.94. So in that case, I did use the $550 proration. And it keeps us right around where we've been, even higher. Okay, so that was the general fund. Now, as you know, we have to adopt budget for each one of our other funds as well. So I won't spend as much time on them. Please stop me if you have questions, but for the sake of having to go through and do the 2020, 2021 budgets as well, I'll kind of move through these a little bit quicker. So the Community Services Fund, this is our campus kids and our preschool. We did pay these employees through COVID-19. So as of March 13th, we refunded money that had been paid in advance, and we did not collect any more tuition payments. So that's why you can see our total revenues were $130,000 less than originally forecasted. And our total expenses, although still were down, were less. They were only $28,000 less. So for the Community Services Fund, we did eat into their fund balance by about $120,000, but it still leaves them with a 39% fund balance as a percentage of expenditures. So that's a very healthy fund. I'm not concerned about it. If we had another year similar to this where we were paying employees but not providing services to kids, obviously it would be a concern. But with $155,000 still in the fund, I don't see any concern there. And we were able to redeploy the campus kids staff in some creative ways and made it work the best we could there. So I just have a quick slide about that. Basically what I just said there. Those are the before and after school employees. So spring break and summer programming were not offered and not paid. So those expenses are not occurring and not occurring at this point either. So we paid them through the end of the year, which was June 3rd. The Food Service Fund. Now you guys may recall that we had a spend down plan for the food service plan. The way that works, Michigan Department of Ed says if your fund balance in the food service fund exceeds 3 months of expenditures, then you need to spend it. And they put you on a plan and make you submit what you're going to spend those excess funds on. And that did happen, and it was approved by MDE. And so we were spending funds. We bought quite a few things, and then COVID also hit. So you can see in our local revenue here, the original budget for local revenue was 387,000. We ended with 293. That's all the kids coming in and buying lunches, buying a la carte, buying drinks. We obviously didn't have that after March 13th. But you'll notice that our federal revenue came in really, really close, or will come in really, really close to previously budgeted. And that's because we've been able to continue. Holly has done an amazing job with the food service fund. And it turned out that we've served just about as many lunches, and gotten the reimbursement claim for them while continuing to pay employees. So you can see that we are going to dip into fund balance by $142,000, but part of that is planned as part of that excess fund balance spend down plan. And we purchased a new food service truck to move things around the district. Coolers. In fact, I think I have it on the next slide here. But before I go to that, we will still have a fund balance in the food service fund in excess of $300,000. 23%, very, very healthy. No concerns there at all. So local revenue is decreased as a result of COVID-19. Again, that's actually kids and adults purchasing food in the buildings. And then expenses, we continue to pay all employees for scheduled hours. Supplies were decreased due to less food preparation, so we didn't have to buy as many of some things. But then new van, milk coolers, reach-in coolers, and display cases were all purchased prior to COVID-19, so that was part of that spend-down plan.
Good question on that one.
Yeah.
The spend-down piece of it.
Absolutely.
Fund balance now, I think it was at 23%.
Yep.
Does that put us to where we no longer have to spend down?
Yeah, that's a great question, Matt. I believe, yes, it does. So 3 months of expenditures, if you take it in aggregate, our expenditures for the year, $1.4 million. So, that's around $350,000. We're right there, but I think we're going to be in a safe place. And we spent down everything that Jeff had submitted on the spend down plan. So, we did our part on that. So after we get our final numbers in, we'll have to look at it again. I know Holly wants to, there was some talk of getting new signs in all of the cafeterias. And that's something that I would actually like to bring to you guys for the June 22nd work session for your consideration. The cost of that would be around $23,000. So that's something we could do for next school year to potentially just kind of safeguard ourselves if we do need to spend down a little bit more. But I don't think it'll be much. Okay, the sinking fund brought in, or will bring in, about $630,000 this year, and we spent about $554,000 out of sinking fund. So I'm predicting that our fund balance on June 30th will be $888,000. Again, that's a really nice fund balance moving forward, where if the bond doesn't pass, we can still make some needed improvements around the district. And then the debt service funds. I don't know how much really to say about debt service funds. In aggregate with the debt service fund, we did have to borrow from the school bond loan fund about $1.5 million this year, $1,524,000. The original budget had us borrowing about $100,000 more than that. So through MyLaugh investments and the refunding that we did last year, we were able to cut back on that borrowing out of the school bond loan fund. So if you go through these 6 funds, we have a small fund balance in each one, and that's what you want. You don't want to keep very much of your debt funds, because if you're keeping the debt funds, that means you're not paying down that debt. So I'll just run through these quickly. We've got the 2012 debt service, which is Fund 37. About $5,000 left over in there. We've got the 2016 A's and the 2016 B's. There's a little bit more left in 2016 B than I would like, $65,000. We will spend that down next year and send that money, or not borrow as much money from the school bond loan fund, because there's no reason to be hanging on to it. Fund 31, $6,000 remaining in there. Fund 32, which is the 2018 bonds, a little bit more than I'd like in there, $33,000 left over. And then Fund 33, which are the 2019 bonds, which are brand new. That's why there was no original budget for them. You can see where we had our expenses and revenues there. So those were our debt service funds for the year. Any questions about the debt service funds or how those work or anything to do with them? Okay.
Nope.
Last one then, the Student Activity Agency Fund. So if you guys recall last year, well, I should say this year, but it would be at this time last year, was the first time that we actually had to adopt a budget for these quote unquote student internal accounts. So these are the accounts that, student council raises money, the cheer team raises money, the class of 2021 raises money, and they have all these accounts. So they're not really, they shouldn't have any revenue from taxes or anything like that. They wouldn't. This is all fund-raised accounts. And so prior to this year, they weren't, they were audited loosely, but we didn't have to report on them. They weren't in our financial statements. So starting this year, they are. So the original budget was there. The final budget, we have $405,000 of revenue. That includes all of the money that came into it from previous years. Only spent 183. So that fund in aggregate, if you add up all those little activity accounts, we'll have a fund balance of $221,000 to end the year. So we do have to adopt that with a budget resolution on June 22nd as well. So coming up on June 22nd, I'll provide the board with an updated budget sheet. So that one-page sheet that I spoke about, I will hand each one of those. Well, I won't hand them to you. I'll show them on the screen. If we were in person, I would certainly hand them to you. And then obviously we will need to take action on adopting all of these budgets. So I will have budget resolutions for you as well. With that, I say thank you.
Thank you. And that moves us right into the 2021 budget.
That was so I just finished up the short budget, you guys. No laughs. Okay.
I laughed. You probably didn't hear it.
I didn't. Thank you. I'm sorry.
Yep. I laughed on the inside.
Okay. And cried on the outside, right?
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay. So the 2021 budget, let me go ahead and find this. All right, so for fiscal year 2021, our initial budgets, a lot of uncertainty still will surround us. I'm not going to read through this again, but the same be it further resolved and the same board policy gets us here. Enrollment history. Now I looked back on our enrollment and I talked to Superintendent Smith about this, and we decided for next year we were going to go with what we projected. And that is a student increase of 3,604. Not an increase of 3,604, but an increase to 3,604.
Sorry, just quick question. Did you share your screen?
Oh, did I not? Are you looking? You're looking at my files, aren't you?
I am looking at your face.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. How's that look?
Can I, better?
It's hurtful, Matt.
Sorry.
All right, so we went with what we believed our enrollment would be for next school year. We're confident that if we can provide in-student instruction, we will be back, and our enrollment trend will continue. So that's what this budget is contingent on and predicated on. All right, now for this foundation allowance history, you can see there's no 8,111. So for this budget and the sheets that go along with it, I provided a $550 proration for the current year, for the 1920 year, which would bring our foundation allowance effectively down to 7,561. And then I kept it there for next fiscal year as well. So that's where you can see that foundation allowance stay the same for both years. That brings our revenue budgets. And so what I'm doing here is for the revenues, I'm comparing the budget to the final budget that I just presented you with the $550 proration. So if you look at it at face value, even with a $550 proration in 2019, 2020, and the same foundation allowance in 2020, 2021, our revenues will still be down by $900,000. And I'll tell you why. The pie graph looks primarily the same. So still roughly 78, almost 80% from the state, and the federals, locals, and incoming others are small pieces behind that as well. The reason for the revenue decline. So local revenue, I greatly decreased the interest and investment revenue because right now it's not doing great. And if we have another year of that, that's where I would estimate it would come in about $50,000 less than we earned this year. There has been conversation about decreasing participation fees for sports. If we do that, that will be about $35,000 less in local revenue. And then being cautious, obviously the end of the school year, we weren't able to have any facility usage fees. That would be another decrease of roughly $30,000 in facility rentals that I put into the budget. So that was our local revenue decrease. From the state perspective, I budgeted a $210,000 decrease in special ed transportation reimbursement. The way that works is as you probably know, we receive 72% of our special ed transportation costs back the following year. Well, our special ed transportation costs were significantly decreased this year as a result of COVID-19. So that resulted in a significant decrease in that reimbursement for next year. I also took the categoricals off the revenue side. I didn't eliminate 31A, that's our at-risk funding, but we're pretty confident we're going to receive less. There's other little categorical grants. The 35A5 and 35A9 are reading literacy grants that I've heard and have pretty good insight that those will be the first on the chopping block for next year. So I did take them off. And then our special ed headly will be decreased as well as a result of the foundation allowance being decreased. Obviously, we received the Michigan State Police grant revenue in the 2019-20 year. That revenue won't be there because we've already spent it, so it will not be there for next year. And then there's a $44,000 increase. If you remember from the previous budget, I mentioned the lapsed funds. You do not get those every year, which is why it wasn't previously in the budget. Very unlikely we'll see them next year. So that's a change from the current year as well. Federal revenue, the $222,000 decreased in ESSER funds. That was a one-time. And then again, we're seeing that we will receive a decrease in Title I and Title II federal funding as well. Incoming transfers, I have no significant changes there. So again, that's dependent on our regional special ed programs that we bill out the other Region 1 districts, Sparta, Comstock Park, Kent City, Northview. So I kept that roughly the same because we're not quite sure exactly where that'll show up, but it's usually right around the same amount. So that's our revenue side for next year. And now I'd like to invite in Mr. Matt Blood to speak. Before we get into the expense side, he's going to speak to you a little bit about our staffing differences from the current year to the 2021 year. Mr. Blood?
And Chris just has all kinds of good news and coming from the state and so forth. But one of the things that I think we need to acknowledge is the increased enrollment that we're experiencing. And that does have a significant impact on our staffing plan for certified staff based on need. Now we're looking at our financial situation and the uncertainty that is involved in that, but also keeping the focus on our students and what's best for our learning environment. And so when we start to tackle our certified staffing plan, we start back in February, March, looking at the sections, looking at where we're at, their class averages, and so forth. And as you know, the younger the students are, the smaller the class sizes, the better. And it progressively increases as they get up into middle school and so forth. So looking at in comparison side by side, I'm gonna just do it for each building, and then I'll show you what it looks like as a total at the end. But with Cedar Trails, you look at last year in our kindergarten age, we had 25 as our class average, and that was a problem. And that was something that our solution at the time was, instead of adding sections in midstream as the school year already started, we hired interventionists to help support inside the classrooms and try to alleviate some of that size struggle that our teachers were having with the kindergarten group. And this year we're looking at for the 2020-2021 school year, having a increase of 2 sections, which would drop it back down to a more manageable number, and that's around 21 class average. First grade, an increase of 1 section gives us a class average of around 23 students. These are some numbers that we have right now. I mean, this is the information that we have that we're going off of. We're going to continue to monitor the enrollments and be able to maybe make some decisions later on if we see that these numbers are getting too big before the start of the school year, or if they're starting to decrease. The special ed shows a decrease for Cedar Trails, but it's really not a decrease to special education. What's happened is we have more students at the older age group than what we have at Cedar Trails, and we're shifting the ASD classroom. We have 2 classrooms at Cedar Trails. We're shifting one of them over to Cedar View. And so that will show there as well. With Beach, go ahead. Yep. At Beach Elementary, you see the class size we have a decrease of 1 section at 2nd grade and an increase of 3rd grade. And we are at 25, almost 26 per class for 3rd grade. And that's another class or grade that we're going to pay a lot of attention to with the enrollment numbers with that. We do have a decrease of 1 section, special education, and that's our mildly cognitive impaired room. The students are transitioning to the upper levels, and we just don't have the numbers to support that at Beach at this time. So we have reduced by 1 section there. So a total of 1 section decrease at Beach. Cedar View, 26 in 4th grade, and like I said, we progressively are going to get higher as we get older. 26 is a manageable number for 4th grade. We did increase it by 1 section to get there. So if we would have stayed at the 8 sections, that would have been a problem for that grade. 5th grade was a bubble year. And so we were at 28 in 2019-20, and we dropped 2 sections to keep us at about the same amount. So we've decreased 2 sections at View, and you can see that we did reduce a least restrictive environment section in special ed, but because of the increase in our ASD, our students with autism, it stayed flat there with that. And then you'll see because of the bubble went to 6th grade, you can see that we were at 31 students per class in 2019-20, and we've increased it to 10 sections. We're still at around 29, so that's another grade we're going to be paying a lot of attention to with the enrollment numbers on that. the middle school and the high school, they're just a different beast when we start looking at classes and looking at schedules, especially once you get to the high school. It's quite a puzzle to figure that out because of some snowball effect that one change causes with other classes and so forth. But we have decreased by 4 sections. These were 4 sections that we increased last year at the end of summer. And this was a decision that we made, and we're able to keep these staff members to fill some of those additions that we have at the elementary level. And also we have a section at the high school that we will be transferring one of the teachers to. So it's not resulting in a layoff, it's just resulting in shifting of staff and throughout the district on that. You can see that we tried to stay relatively even in here. So the only changes are to the house, to the 4 core area classes, we reduced by 1 with that. We're in the middle of determining what that structure looks like. And that's some progress that we still are trying to work through in terms of, does it remain to the 4 houses, or does it switch to some other type of model that the team is looking at on that. The high school, you can see some ups and downs, and that's just kind of a normal thing with a high school schedule based on the numbers that you have in each grade level, as to what classes or what electives they can choose from and so forth. But really the challenge was to try to stay as staff neutral as possible and to keep as many programs available as possible on that. And as you can see, we do have a slight increase of 0.34. Some of that is because we are offering French 3 this year, that we were able to have the numbers to be able to support that, to be able to increase that in the world language department on that. So putting all of these together, you can see that there is, if Chris, you want to switch to the next slide, you can see that there is an actual decrease in the difference of total FTE throughout the district on that. So what questions might you have that I can answer?
I
know
feel
this,
like,
what? I'm sorry, Shannon, go ahead.
oh, no, you go ahead, it's fine.
All right, so I know this has been a challenging year and none of us have a crystal ball. Getting some feedback from some of the community members though, that depending on how the school for next year, there are families that are considering homeschool versus Cedar Springs schools, just because they don't necessarily want their kids coming back to school with a mask or even some of the social distancing. So I've heard more conversation from members of the community around homeschooling than I've heard in a long time. And do we have any kind of thoughts around how we would gauge, how our enrollment acted? Have we had more inquiries around homeschooling or distance learning than we've had, or I'm just wondering how that may impact your matrix here. If we have any kind of way of gauging strange event we'll have on our total enrollment.
Yeah, I appreciate that question, Trent. We are utilizing that Kent County, the county-wide survey that we put out through the KISD. And we're expecting a report next Wednesday, just to give us some indications as to what people are thinking. We know that if we're remote, that there's a significant drop-off in the rate that people view our capacity to effectively meet the needs of their students. And so, one of the components of the hybrid approach, and I'll let Jen speak to it as well, is, not only are we going to be mindful of the need to have potentially different schedules for students to be on campus. We also know that in having a robust online experience is going to be critical to any of the solutions that we put out there next year, because if we don't do it, we know that someone else will. And so that's a part of the countywide thinking, but it's also going to be a significant part of what the district is doing as well. So does that answer your question? Or Jen, do you have anything else that you could add?
Sorry, I was talking on mute there, Scott. With knowing that we increase presence, if we do have varying schedules, it feels to me like that means we'll need more, right? Smaller classrooms if we have to do that distancing, or if we do some teaching online, or we get experts that are online, that it feels almost like that would require a headcount increase. The model shows a decrease. So that's why I'm just wondering if we're teaching in a face-to-face format and we're teaching in a distance learning format, or we're staggering into smaller groups that are maybe at a longer day, or it just feels like that we're in would become less efficient and require more headcount.
Yeah, and I appreciate that question. This is an initial look at the budget based on, you know, the initial model of we're going to have kids back on campus. We're working through a number of exercises right now as a district administrative team to look at all of our resources, our human resources, our financial resources, our square footage or space resources, to see how we can maximize our product next year for our students. And so I think this is going to be one of those things where, you know, we've got a target that Chris and Matt have put out there, but we know that there may need to be some adjustments to this target. Just as it is every year. You know, if we come in and we have 100 more students than what we were expected, like last year, we had to add 4 staff members at the middle school late in the summer because we had such an infusion of new enrollees. And so I think that's, you know, one of those dynamics that we just have to be fluid with. But this is a reasonable starting point for the staffing plan.
No, I agree. I just was curious if there was any conversations around that. I agree. It's a point. You have to assume that at some point we go back to normal. I just was curious if there had been any count of that. So, thank you.
Yeah, you're so welcome. Jen and the team are actually getting started working next week around, you know, what that learning experience will look like in Cedar Springs for our students. And so we're excited for those conversations and excited to get that started in June, where we have a couple of months of time to think, versus March into April, where we had a couple of weeks to think.
Yeah.
I was just I don't really have a question so much, but I had an observation. I think that, and I don't remember the exact number, pardon me, but I believe it said something like 29 kids for 5th grade. That still seems very high to me. 5th graders are still elementary students. I would like to encourage that if we can possibly fit it into the budget, that we add one of those FTEs back in and bring that down a little bit. That's all.
Thank you, Shannon.
All right.
I didn't
Yeah,
know.
and that was just along the lines of what Scott was saying. I'll just jump in. I mean, typically, the initial budget is passed, you know, in June, and then you amend sometime between December and February. We are most likely going to need to amend this general fund budget much earlier than that this year, once we have a clearer picture of where we're at. So, and we will do so. But the good news is it'll just be 1 year and it'll just be general fund. So won't be as long as of a presentation. Continuing onward then, all set with staffing. Thank you, Matt. So our expenses comparatively to now, I did not compare. Typically, I would compare our 2021 original expenses to the final budget from the previous year. I didn't do that just because the final budget, again, from this year is just so strange, right? I mean, with 3 months nearly of not operating school buildings, it's almost not fair to compare to. So this is just a look from all the different parts. Again, basic programs, those are your direct instruction, added needs, and I could go down the line, same as the previous budget. So you can see there's a variance. We are going to spend almost $1 million less in this budget than the previous amendment that was passed in February, and I'll explain how now. Oh, one thing, sorry, I did more than I thought. I did compare it to the 1920 amended here, but then I also compared the budget to the 1920 final. So apologize about that. Just figured I'd put them both on there. So when you do put them side by side, you can see where the variances are compared to the final budget as well. So, but I'll run through the variances and we can look at these variances. These assumptions are based on what or how those numbers came in. So basic programs, what we did is we gave step increases for all certified staff, and that's in the current contract. So the current contract states that they receive a step increase each year, but they only receive a % increase on their base salary if there is an increase in foundation allowance. So that was not included, as I'm not thinking we will receive a increase in foundation allowance for this year. So union support staff will receive a step and wage increase per their contract. And then, as Matt said, we replaced the retirements and additional kindergarten teachers with current staffing and shifted things around from that middle school model. As Matt also said, we eliminated the kindergarten interventionist positions, as well as some certified recess interventionists that we brought in. Those are not in this budget either. So those were a one-year temporary position. And I reduced the budget for curriculum purchases. So just given the state of the budget, we'll add those back as necessary based on when we have a better idea. But for now, I reduced a lot of that budget to begin with. So added needs, as Matt said, again, this is special ed programs, primarily the My Side program at Beach. There was a teacher and a parapro there. Those were both eliminated. They weren't laid off. They're going into other positions. And again, we're anticipating lower allocations for at-risk 31A funding and Title I funding. So therefore, we won't have as much to spend, which is why it's lower on the expense side as well. Pupil services, again, psychologist, social worker, nursing, things of that nature. No significant changes there. Instructional staff services. We did add the assistant director of student services position. So that's somebody that will work alongside Stacy Voskel. It's actually April Stevens. That position was added and it's new to the budget. General administration. There is a reduction of 1.0 FTE severance pay for an executive administrator. And that created quite a difference in the budget. And then, as I said earlier, elimination of election costs are also not in this budget because of my optimism. School administration, no significant changes there. Business services, no significant changes. Operations and maintenance, we will speak briefly at the end of the evening, but there is an additional custodial cost of about $125,000 per the new service levels that we will be receiving as part of our RFP for custodial services. So that was something that was decided before COVID hit, and we need to go down that road of naming our provider. So no planned capital outlay for 2021. Again, those are those extra purchases, and based on the budget, we're not going to plan on any of that. We're not going to be purchasing any vehicles or anything of that nature. And then I returned utilities to the pre-COVID levels and projections. Transportation, I adjusted the transportation to be in line with the Dean contract. So our contract with Dean Transportation says there's a 2.75 increase each year in costs. So what I did is I went back to the original budget from last year, looked up history, and added that 2.75% multiplier there. And then there's still potential savings in regional billing through Kent ISD as we worked through some of those challenges this year. The billing model, you may recall, was changed to be based on headcount, not on miles driven. So that should help a district like Cedar Springs out significantly. Support services, no significant changes there. Athletics, step and benefit increases for coaches. There was a small increase for paid help. If we do eliminate pay to play fees, it's my understanding that a lot of students work gates, gathering soccer balls, things such as that to offset their pay to play fees. If we eliminate the pay to play fees, Mr. Norton will have to hire workers. So there will be an increased expense there. And the budget is contingent on sports occurring as normal, which at this point may be a stretch. But again, I wanted to base it on what we know at the current time. Community service, no significant changes. There is a Title I allocation to private schools that wasn't previously in the budget. We need to do that again. That's only about $7,000. Our copier contract, there's no net changes there, just a shift between principal and interest. Building and site, you'll see a difference because we don't have the safety grant for this year. So there is a decrease there. This is our pie chart for this year's expenses, for 21's expenses, and it looks very similar in nature to the previous year. In fact, I think there's a small uptick in basic programs, but nothing significant there. Questions about expenses as I move through this quickly? All right, we'll keep trucking. As I do it by cost objective again, you can see our salaries are actually down a little bit. Benefits are a little bit up. The reason the benefits are up a little bit is because MIPSers, the retirement costs and the insurance costs obviously go up each year. And I believe actually I can move to this next slide to show you that. I can go back to the pie chart, but I wanted to run through the different parts here. Salaries, retirees were replaced with existing staff. So that's why there was a decrease in salary expense overall, despite steps for staff. Elimination of the general admin severance pay from previous years and steps for staff as stated in their contracts. Benefits, health benefit costs increased 3.3%, which is based on the what's known as the hard cap, which is Public Act 152. They release each year. So we increase what the district will spend towards medical benefits. And then about a 0.7% MIPSers, again, the Michigan Public Schools Employee Retirement System increase. So despite all of the budget uncertainties, we are going to be spending more on retirement than ever before. Purchase services, reduction in EDGE staff certified interventionists. I spoke about that. So that's why that level went down. I did reduce long-term substitutes. We'll add those as needed. We don't know who's going to be out at this point. And then I spoke about the transportation budget as well. Repairs and maintenance, there's that increase in improved custodial services and coverage and a reduction from the copier contract. I found as I went through the budget that we were actually double booking our copier contract. We were recording it as both an expense in purchase services and in principal and interest. So I eliminated the purchase services and just put it in there. So that's why you'd see a reduction there. A little bit of a variance. Briefly, supplies, I decreased the budget for textbooks. We're not saying we're not going to get them. We just want to be much more meaningful. So I decreased that budget. Not that we weren't meaningful in the past, but just be very thoughtful in everything we do purchase. Obviously, fuel for buses will cost more than the current year. And then I worked with John Norton, and he reduced his athletic supplies budget slightly, just knowing the state of our world we're in right now. Capital outlay, I've said it many times, no Michigan State Police grant next year, and we're not planning any capital outlay. Again, those are those big dollar capital asset purchases, like the gym curtains at the high school this year. We spent $50-some thousand on new curtains, or maybe it was auditorium curtains. again, not planning for those type of purchases for next year with the decrease in revenues. And then there was no significant changes in other. And then transfers, those are paying for itinerant staff. We do have a slight variation, slight reduction there, as one of our itinerants will be employed by the Kent ISD next year. And then we had a resignation rehire for this current year. So the reduction is a net result of that. And that takes me to my one-page budget sheet. So if we take this through, you can see that you're familiar, hopefully, with this June 8th, 2020 final budget, where we reduced fund balance by $46,000. Again, that is the $550 proration budget. If we go into next year, 2020, 2021, with the same foundation allowance, which is $550 less, we don't get any less, we don't get any more for next year. The total amount that expenditures will exceed revenues will be $1,256,000. So if you take all that together and you bring it down here, I apologize for not being in person. We would finish the year with a fund balance just to the north of $6 million, which would be 15.52% as a percentage of expenditures. So if we don't make any significant reductions and we go through the expenses that I just tried my best to describe to you, with a $550 proration in each year, or $550 reduction, that is where we would end next school year. Questions about that?
Chris, I have a question.
Yes.
I know we in the past have talked about having a healthy fund balance so that we don't have to borrow money at the beginning of the school year because of that gap.
Yep.
At the 15.52%, is that going to be enough to avoid that borrowing, or are we starting to look at that?
That's a fantastic question. That is still plenty to avoid borrowing. As long as we are north of 10 to 12%, we can avoid borrowing. So I'd still be very comfortable at that amount. If we continued down this path where we were going to receive less funding in subsequent years, we would have to look at what we would need to do. But no, I do not anticipate any borrowing at this amount, Shannon. But I'll speak about this real briefly later with the debt funds. There are a few House bills out there to relax the deadlines for tax payments, and that could make it a little bit tricky, but I still think I'm still very confident we'll be okay for the next school year without borrowing, just because we do have a summer tax levy.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? That was a great one. And I will say that we are one of the lucky districts. I think with all this going on, a lot of districts are really looking at having to borrow for cash purposes. So we're fortunate to not have to at this point. One of the nice things that goes with having a good rainy day fund. Okay, so I'll try to move through quickly, and there you can see it. If we finish the year with that picture, we're still, as long as we could, weather the next year, we would still be in a pretty decent shape to move forward and be fiscally stable. So that's just some historical numbers there of our fund balance. And that takes us through the general fund. So I'll run quickly through the community services and all the other funds, and then I'll get on to questions. So this is contingent on things getting back to normal. So for our campus kids in preschool, I really kept things roughly about where we were predicting they would be for this year. So revenues for community services, just a slight uptick from where we thought we'd be this year. And then I ran salaries and benefits, had us eating into fund balance by just a little bit, $8,000. And obviously that could change. And really that's because I don't have any summer funding coming in. Obviously that would push us so that we were actually adding to that community services fund balance. Obviously still finishing with around $150,000, very comfortable there. So I said here, revenue projections based on full return to service beginning in September. the way things are trending right now, daycare centers can open. So if we do get into phase 5 of the governor's plan later in the summer, we may be able to open campus kids for a month or two. So that's something that will help out the community services fund and our families that take advantage of that service. So, and then obviously a full return service for the fall. For the food service fund, I'll talk about the next page, but again, I had spoken about how we were still in good shape there. For my 21 budget, I have us returning back to normal and adding $6,000 to fund balance for next year, which would give us a fund balance still of about $340,000. Projections are based on a full return. And then what I did for my revenue projections there is I just extrapolated where we were on March 12th and forecasted that through the rest of the year. So obviously our enrollment would be roughly the same, and we would be hoping that we would be selling and providing just as much food for our kids. I did increase wages and benefits based on the steps and benefit increases and kept all the staffing the same. And then the only capital outlay purchases that I had in there were the new cafes signage that I mentioned earlier. So that's something that we'll need to look at in the near future. And again, that carries a cost of about $20,000 to $23,000. So I did include that in their budget. They'd still be finishing the year with a positive addition to fund balance, even if we did that. For the sinking fund, this is a tough one because especially with the bond, we don't know what we're going to spend out of the sinking fund. That'll be contingent on whether or not we're going to start a bond construction campaign. So I held the expenditures roughly at what we had them for this year. Again, this is an initial budget, but if you look at it this way, we're going to finish this year with about $871,000 in the sinking fund. Okay, if we add $658,000 in revenue to that next year, that'll give us over $1.5 million in which we can continue to meet our needs, our capital needs around the district, and use those dollars as appropriate. So that would be our sinking fund budget. And then there's the debt funds. And I mentioned this earlier. My goal is not to borrow any more money from the school bond loan fund than is absolutely necessary, because the more we borrow and pay interest on, obviously that's going in the wrong direction. So as you look through these budgets, which they're all these are in PDF form in the board book. So a little reading material for later if you didn't get enough. What I do with these budgets is I bring them right down to a fund balance of $1,200 each one of them. So if you look down fund balance June 30th, 2021, in all actuality, it's, collections still come in later, but my goal is always to get these down so they're relatively close to, you want to have a little bit of a buffer, but you don't want to borrow more than you need. So that's what you'll see in each one of these budgets. And again, the revenues and expenditures are based on our payments. So each year, depending on the maturity of the bonds, we have interest payments, but then based on the year, we have principal payments as well. So next year, the 2012 bonds, we have, you can see 1.5 million. So there is going to be a principal payment on there. Whereas the 2016A, we're just paying interest on that. It's not coming to maturity. We're not going to make a principal payment on it. So we really only need $178,000 in that fund for next year. So I'll run through those real briefly. I'll just probably skate right through them again. If you'd like to look at them, they are in the board book, our 6 different debt service funds. And then I did put just a little summary here. And this is something, Shannon, that I just wanted to talk to. This came to my attention last week. So I'm projecting that we will need to borrow about $1.3 million from the school bond loan fund next year to make our May debt payment. So we have a November debt payment and we have a May debt payment each year. So we bring in around $6 million in debt funds from property taxes over the course of the year. We need about $550,000 of that for our November 1 payments, and then we need the rest of it for our May payments. So with a summer tax levy, we usually have more than enough to make our November payments, and then we need to borrow a little bit right now anyways to make those May payments. So two House bills have not passed but came up last week that may impact those tax collections and make it a little bit tricky. On the general fund, I still think we're just fine there. I'm very confident, but some districts might be in a little bit of trouble. So what these bills do is they suspend the collection of late charges on property taxes for 11 months. So the delinquency date for the summer 2020 taxes, it would be March 1st, 2021. You need to pay them by then or else you're delinquent. It would move it all the way back to October 1st, 2021. So that could be a problem for us from a standpoint of that's outside of our fiscal year. So a little bit nerve-wracking. And then it would allow taxpayers to enter into a partial payment plan until the winter 2020 taxes are due and still be considered timely. So I don't know what the impact of that will be at that point or at this point, but just something to keep in mind as we move through, because, you know, typically your property tax collections are like clockwork and you know what you're going to get. But given the light of the COVID-19 pandemic, they're trying to provide relief to people, which rightfully so, but it's potentially going to cause a little bit of trouble for school districts.
Chris, is there a reason we can't take that almost 3 million from our fund, from our fund that's at 18 whatever percent, instead of borrowing it? Can we borrow it from ourselves? I'm sorry?
From our general fund?
No, from our, yeah, well, kind of.
Yeah,
Yeah.
fund balance.
From our
Yes,
fund balance?
fund balance. Thank you, Heidi. I had a brain fart.
You know, that's a really great question. We could potentially do that. I haven't heard of districts doing it, but typically the amount of interest that we pay on that school bond loan fund, we can make more than that in a typical year by investing those excess funds. And you don't commingle funds. I'd have to talk to our bond attorney on that, but it's something I can definitely look into.
Yeah, I'm not real good with this stuff, so I just wondered.
No, Shannon, those are wonderful questions and they're thought provoking. So I really appreciate it. Yeah, it's a great question. And maybe the reason, I'll just leave that out of there, but I'll look into that. That's a really good idea.
I had a sinking fund question too. Do you want me to wait till you're done here, or?
Oh, go right ahead.
Now?
No,
I just wondered if there's a time limit for how long we can hold on to those funds. When we pull in sinking funds, do we have to spend them by a certain time?
Another great question. No. So actually our sinking fund levy expires, I believe it'll be in my third presentation, which is only 8 slides. But if memory serves, it expires in just a few years. But we can keep those funds as long as we want. There's no expiration date on them. We have to spend them on what they were allocated for, you know, building and site repairs. But yeah, we can. There's no expiration date. So,
okay, thank you.
Yeah, you bet. Thank you. Okay, so and then the last one is the student activity fund. So we're actually going to account for these completely different in the coming year, which is very exciting for Natalie and I, but I won't bore you with that. And you can see that this will be the first year that we're actually going to carry over a fund balance, which I spoke about in the previous one, of $221,000. And then just forecasting based on what we brought in this year, I'm estimating we'll bring in just north of 200,000 more next year in fundraising and like type of contributions, and then spend a little bit more than that. So again, those are funds that are at the discretion. You know, obviously we're the fiscal agent, and we have to make sure they're spent appropriately, but they're spent largely at the discretion of the group in which has raised the funds. So $200,000 fund balance there, which is just great. So, and that leaves us with this last slide. Same thing at the June 22nd board meeting. Work session. If I know anything more about next year, I will update these budgets and I'll present them to you in a clear and concise manner. And then we will have the resolutions to be presented. So be up for adoption, 1920 and 2021 budgets. And with that, we're done with this one. Any other questions? Thank you all.
thank you for striving for normal. I'm not speaking just for myself, but I know other board members have received communications from parents, that they're really yearning to come back to normal. So,
Well, that's certainly what we want to.
Mhm.
I think I can speak for everybody. No question about it.
okay. Any other questions, board? Okay.
Just a comment. I just wanted to say thank you, Chris. I know that was a lot of information and a lot to cover, but just really appreciate your thoroughness.
Thank you so much. It's difficult to do over this. I'm a in-person people kind of guy, and so it's difficult to do it through a screen. So thank you for bearing with me, and yeah, can't wait to actually meet you guys in person.
All right. Okay. We can move on then to our food service recommendation, and this is a second discussion, and it is on for action tonight.
Yep. So just I'll say a quick thing. I have no presentation for this. Again, I mean, we can click on those attachments, but this is just to not raise our food prices for next year. So.
Any questions, board? I think we're okay. Thank you. And our next item is the 2020 L4029 tax forms with
Right.
Chris.
So this is, I promise, my last presentation for the evening.
No, you have one more.
Are you sure?
I'm sure.
Okay. All right. So the L4029 tax form. This is the form that we send off. I'm not sure. There we go. This is the form we send off to all our local municipalities to tell them how much taxes to levy. So just a little bit of history. This is just a brief education. I know this was something that I struggled with when I first started in this field to understand. The Headley Amendment requires a local unit of government to reduce its millage when the annual growth on existing property is greater than the rate of inflation. So I'm sure you guys have seen this in the past, but we always have to consider the Headley Amendment when we calculate our tax levy for each year. So the resulting property tax revenue gets rolled back, so to speak, so the growth in revenue does not exceed the rate of inflation. So I put the formula in here of how this is calculated, in fact, and we get to, I'll show you with the numbers in it here in a minute, but if we didn't have a truth and taxation hearing, which technically our June 22nd board meeting is, we would not get to multiply by the consumer price index, and we would have to take a greater rollback. But because we get to multiply by the CPI, which in this year was 1.9%, it helps us. So if we put our numbers in here, in 2019, now these are just non-homestead properties in Cedar Springs School District. So our non-homestead taxable value was $131 million, and we subtract out the 2020 losses from that and multiply it by the consumer price index, and then divide it by the 2020 taxable value minus the 2020 additions. This is just the Headley formula. We get, believe it or not, it's actually 0.99999, but from Kent County, it was recorded as 1.0. So there is no Headley rollback for our non-homestead property tax collections for this year. And that is what is on the L4029. You may recall last year there was a Headley rollback. So those stack, if we did have one, it would be against the previous rollback, if that makes sense. So it's always a good thing to not have a Headley rollback. This is something I just wanted to mention. I'm sure it's been shown to you in the past, but the district can go to voters and ask for them to adopt a millage rate greater than 18 mils. The millage would never go above 18 mils. It can't by law, but if they adopted it, if it passed for 19 mils, for example, the Headley rollback would go against the 19 mils. Does that make sense? It's kind of a not to exceed 18, but you can roll back from a larger number to kind of protect yourself, to hedge your bets against Headley. So regardless, what is it costing the district by not going to the voters and asking them to restore our Headley? If we were able to levy taxes on the full 18 mills on non-principal residencies. These are commercial properties and vacation homes. We would be receiving that number right there, $2,423,705 by only being allowed to levy 17.9172 mills or receiving that. So on an annual basis, this is costing the district about $11,000. Not a significant amount. Certainly not enough probably to go take another tax or, another ballot proposal to the voters for. But something I just wanted to show you guys, because once you're rolled back, so last year we were rolled back to 17.9172. The only way to restore that back in the other direction is through a vote. So even though we weren't rolled back this year, we stay at the previous Headley amount. This is what the L4029 looks like. So if you look at that top line here, I'll try to highlight it. I don't know if it'll work. It did not. The top line voted non-home operating. That shows our 17.9172. So any questions for me about the non-homestead millage reduction, the Headley rollback, anything like that?
No, thank you for bringing it up so we can keep it on the radar, keep it in the process.
Yep, and that's just one of those things where I'm not sure what, the prior knowledge is there. So if you have any questions, always feel free to ask. There is the Building and Site Sinking Fund here as well. That actually did get rolled back. So that's something that it was authorized by voters as a 1 mil sinking fund. In previous years, it was rolled back to 0.979. This year, it got rolled back again. So now it's going to become 0.9734. So almost 1 mil, but it was rolled back. And I actually had a conversation today. Why was the sinking fund rolled back, but the non-operating homestead millage not rolled back? Scott, remind me, I want to have that conversation with you. Very fun conversation. But the reason is the sinking fund is based on all taxable value in the district. The operating is just based on non-homestead, non-principal residencies, and that's why. So, and then of course our 7 mil debt fund as well. So on this presentation, we will have to have Tracy and Heidi's signatures on these. After we adopt them at the next board meeting, this is the Kent County, this is the Newaygo County. They're identical as far as the levy goes. And that is all I have for the L4029.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
And your last presentation is the 2021 Kent ISD service agreements.
Yes. Okay. So thank you. I did not make a presentation about these. I actually emailed the ISD about these last week and received them. I received them this morning, as a matter of fact. So they were very late breaking. And I can show them to you briefly here. So I have too many things on my screen. Here we go. So we only have 2 service agreements with Kent ISD this year. We have the payroll services agreement. So we pay Kent ISD $11.66 to do a multitude of things, from paying our employees and preparing all the payroll files to sending our payments to the Office of Retirement Services and reconciling all of that, preparing W-2s, just a lot of different things. And for $11.66 per student, they did not change that amount this year. So that's a service agreement the district has had for a very long time. And it was great news to hear that they were not increasing the cost of that service for this year in the light of everything else going on. And then the other thing we are using Kent ISD as a shared service agreement is our technology services. So rather than having a district employee as our technology director and employing a technology staff, we have shared services with Kent ISD and other Region 1 districts. So nothing new. We've done this every year. They also kept the price per student the same for the technology agreement. but those are just something that the board can either act on this evening, or we can discuss and table and take action for the June 22nd board meeting as well. So again, I didn't put together a presentation for those, but I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have about them. Oh, one other thing I should mention. In the past, we have had another service agreement, which was accounts payable, where we would send our invoices to the ISD. They would enter them into our financial software. I would approve them, and then they would print and send the checks out. Effective July 1st, we will be bringing that back into district office. So we've received some training. Barb Gust in district office has already been out to the ISD. I'll be going with her next week, and we've got all of our equipment. We're making it happen. So that's going to save the district about $20,000 to $22,000 to bring that service back into district office rather than outsourcing to Kent ISD. So that service agreement is not here tonight.
So I would ask the board, it is on for action. It is typical business with the district. Are we comfortable leaving it on for action, or we can move when we get there to not take action tonight?
Was there a timing issue? Do we need to get it approved today, or?
No, it can be approved. It can be approved on the July 22nd meeting as well. There's no timing issue there at all.
Actually, the June 22nd meeting. So 2 weeks from now.
I assume you've looked at this, Chris, but would we have any savings if we brought either of the other things back into district?
Yeah, so for technology services, you know, truthfully, there would be advantages to having a district employee, but the cost would be significantly higher to employ district staff for that. For payroll, there could, if we could bring payroll back and pay our existing staff the same to process it, there would obviously be some good cost savings there. I know that's something that Jeff had spoken about, and it's something that I'd like to look at for next year. I think bringing the accounts payable back 1 year, and you know, with me being new and everything else going on, it'd be a lot to try to bite off both of those at once, but it's definitely something I think we will look at for
That's
the
fair.
following year. Yep, because
Thank
if we
you.
can make it, if we can do it with who we have in the office, then absolutely. Yep.
Any other thoughts? We going on for action tonight, or?
I don't have any issue with it.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm okay with action tonight.
Okay.
I'm okay with that.
All right. If anybody changes their mind between now and then, go ahead and speak up when we get there. Okay. Thank you. And the next item is Neola policy with Scott Smith.
So this series of policy updates are recommended updates from Neola. They help us remain in compliance with legislative changes that have come through, but also some of them are related to just enhancements to practice that Neola has picked up from listening to experiences from individual districts that are customers of theirs. So are there any questions on any of these policies?
If nobody has any questions or dire concerns, I will be planning to call the action vote all conclusive for all of them together.
There was one that I saw. I'm trying to pull it up right now.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't know. I can flag it later if we need to.
And we can push these two to July. So if we want a little bit more time to work through these, we don't have to take action on them tonight.
I did not have a problem with taking action on them. It was just a grammatical error, I think. Oops. I'll find it. We can keep going
Okay,
for
we'll
now.
do that. Okay, we'll move on to Europe trip update with Jen.
Good evening. So you have a document in front of you proposing a postponement to the student trip to Europe, which was originally approved to happen a year from now. And because of COVID-19, Sarah has asked if we would consider allowing that to be pushed out a year when world travel will be more certain, and in order to allow students to have the opportunity to fundraise and have the best chance at going on this trip. So her reasoning is laid out in the document that's attached there. I did ask her, if things should clear up and be back to normal, would you still want to offer it in 2021? And she said no, because the cost would be too steep for most families, and she really wants many people to have the opportunity to be able to fundraise and experience this trip. So she said I would consider it, but her hesitation really was outweighing that because she really wants more kids to be able to experience that. So she was asking if it would be okay if we approved it for next summer, summer 2021 instead, summer 2022, which sounds like a long time from now, instead of 2021.
I appreciate her caring thinking. It is
Yeah,
what
her reasoning is in a good spot to have students right at the center and make sure that families are able to experience this. You see that in the document there are some changes that would occur because of that in terms of the collaboration that would have happened with the other school, but she is hopeful that in the next year she'll be able to find another school that would be willing to collaborate and offer the same trip.
Jen, do you have the sense that any of the other trips that were planned for next summer or next February, for instance, talking about band here, do those look like they might be postponed as well?
You know, Shannon, that's a fantastic question. Everything is just really on hold right now. So as we have more clarity around the health situation, this one especially because it's outside the United States and a little bit different level of risk. We're just kind of taking things as they come. So as we get closer to that, we'll be in touch with those folks who are sponsoring those trips to find out, what seems to be the best step forward for families and students.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
okay. Thank you. Any other questions? Okay. We'll move on. Thank you, Jen. Next, we have the West Michigan Talent Triangle resolution with Scott Smith.
So in our Red Hawk Weekly from May 29, I included this and a number of other resources that the West Michigan Talent Triangle, which is made up of districts from Kent, Ottawa, and Muskegon counties, have put together. They've rallied around to try to initiate some influence in Lansing, but also in Washington. And so this specific resolution is intended to show a uniformity and a united front from Kent, Ottawa, and Muskegon counties, urging our legislators to try and keep public education funding whole to the best of their abilities as we enter into the 2020-2021 school year.
Any questions? Concerns? Okay. That's on for action tonight because of timing. So, correct? Yes. Okay. All right. Thank you. And we'll move on to the GRBS Custodial Services Contract. Oh, it's Chris. You're back.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So let me just grab my. So this was something that we did speak about a couple board meetings ago. Actually, Ken Simon spoke on this. I had put together a one-page flight plan pertaining to this. But you know, I've spoken with Ken, and I've worked with GRBS previously, and their new service model that they presented, based on the RFP, the request for proposal that went out prior to my employment. I'm confident that GRBS is going to be able to meet the needs of the district, especially in the light of the new world we're living in, with cleanliness standards being at an all-time necessity. So I don't know what questions you guys may have. We would like to move forward with GRBS as our service provider for custodial services with their new service model, which, if you recall, did include some more management oversight. And I'd be happy to answer anything you have. I can show, Ken had the spreadsheet. I can show you my flight plan pertaining to this. But if you guys don't want to see that again, that is completely fine too. But we would just like to move forward and sign that contract with GRBS. That's what we are recommending to the board.
I had a question, and my thinking was, is it COVID compliant, the contract, or would we be looking at an amendment if different strategies come forward?
So the thing that I've come to find with GRBS, I feel like I'm a salesman for them, but you know, they're very willing to work and roll with the punches. In the light of the shutdown, you know, there was no struggle of, well, we have a contract and you're going to continue to pay us and we're going to continue to staff. I mean, they came up with a plan with Ken and with myself to focus on certain aspects of surface cleaning and, you know, reduce staffing because it wasn't necessary anymore. And so I know that they have a lot of ideas about bringing in the Clorox 360 and probably even more technologically advanced ways of cleaning. So those are all things that there was equipment included in their bid. So that's already built in, and I know that they will continue to evolve and not rest on their laurels as the world of cleaning advances. I'm pretty confident in that, Heidi.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely.
Anybody else have any questions on that? We've been
Is
over.
this on for tonight?
Yes, it is.
Yep. So that one, Matt, that was brought up in the work session in April, I believe, and then it's coming back now. So
it's actually not on for tonight.
Yeah,
that's why I was asking.
Yeah, so
I didn't see it on there.
Yeah.
So honestly, that does not require board approval because it's a service. The district can select, and honestly, you know, the RFP was more of just to get a feel of what was out there. But we just wanted to make sure that the board was included in the decision and comfortable with the decision before we move forward. But it doesn't require action.
Okay, there we go.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification. And I'll just throw, you know, I'm comfortable with your guys' decision to move forward with them. It seems like you are comfortable with them, that they're willing to work with us, and hopefully it's a good fit moving forward, especially in light of the unknowns right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, you know, that contract, like any custodial contract or third-party service contract, comes with a 60-day clause. So if we're absolutely unhappy down the road, we can provide notice and go out to bid again. So that's always an option.
And I think too, one thing that's nice as we move forward is, you know, that we do have that flight plan fidelity checking tool. So we're going to be able to incorporate more measuring sticks out there so that we can check in on quality and make sure that things are being done to the standards that they are laid out to be. And then as adjustments need to be made, we'll be able to do that and just face it head on with the GRBS team.
Absolutely.
Okay, all right, thank you. Okay, we'll move on then to our last discussion item, and that is the superintendent evaluation. And it's that time of year, and this is one of the items that the board is charged with, is to review our employee, Mr. Scott Smith. And so you have shared with you the format that we use with the different topics that we look at. And typically we've done this with a self-reflection, with Scott sharing with us. And then he also shares with us other evidence of articles, and I don't know, there were way over 300. There was some such number of last year. So that will be forthcoming. So this is the beginning of this process. So we're all familiar with it. We've been through it together. Is there anything you want to follow in with, Scott? Or probably we would have more conversation on the 22nd as well. Anybody have any? Scott,
Heidi,
your plan was for the more discussion on the 22nd?
Correct, yes.
Finalization, or yes.
Heidi,
Yes.
did you want us to fill it out kind of on our own, or are we going to fill it out together as a board? How are we moving forward with it?
Refresh my memory. What did we do last year? It seemed to work well.
I think we did it as a board, but I can't say that I remember very well either.
I think we used it as a discussion model, and Scott presented to us his self-reflection. And then we commented from there if we had any variances or growth points from where he self-reflected. So we would be reviewing and coming with those observations or sharings with him.
Okay, so we don't have to fill it out completely, just,
Nope.
you know,
Just-
note maybe something if you want to talk about it.
Right.
Otherwise, all right.
Right. And
All right,
he'll
cool.
have more information forthcoming. Yes.
Did you, after we had that conversation, kind of do a formal one with all the collective comments? Or am I remembering that incorrectly?
I did do a formal, there was a collective document that was presented.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
And I'll get you those artifacts hopefully by Friday, if not by Monday morning or Monday afternoon. So you'll have a full week to be able to review them.
Okay, so that is that. So that brings us to the portion of our meeting where we have our public comment. And typically the person would have 3 minutes to share with the board their thoughts or concerns. And if there was anything then that Mr. Smith would need to follow up on, he would take care of that. We do only have 2 participants with us tonight. It would be Brianna and Haley. So if they want to raise their hand, Matt can see if they had intended to speak. Now, oh, I can see the hand too. So we have Haley, and talking to Haley, you've been unmuted. And if you could give us your name and your contact information so we could follow up with you, we'd be happy to hear your 3-minute public comment.
Hi, everybody. My name is Haley, and I am a representative of the Bill Saxon for State Representative campaign. I am the Education Policy Coordinator with the Bill Saxon campaign. Bill is the father of 3 young children, ages 3, 3, and 5, who is running for state rep to make sure that all of our community's children receive the education that they deserve. Bill knows that this year, thankfully, as you guys have expressed, you have a district that's been affected less so by these changes, especially compared to some other districts that we've been sitting in on. But we do want to stress and put pressure in Lansing in the years ahead to make sure that education is the #1 priority in Lansing, and that we will be able to protect our public school budget from drastic cuts. Bill will not allow us to once again balance the state budget on the back of our kids' futures. I'm pretty much here tonight just to take some notes about the meeting and share them with Bill later, but he would love to talk to you himself sometime soon. He plans on reaching out to all school members individually, but you can always reach him at his email address, which is bill@billinthehouse. I will send that in the Q&A so you guys have that on record as well. I'll send my contact information there as well as our campaign manager who you can reach. But I just want to thank you guys for giving me a moment to speak. I've had a really great time listening tonight. It has certainly been long, but it's great information, and we definitely want to make sure that, you know, we still have that same fund come 2021, 2022. You know, we want to make sure that even though some unexpected circumstances are surrounding us, that's not going to have to, you know, sit on the backs of our children's future and essentially the future of Michigan as well.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me tonight. It's my pleasure.
Okay, I think we don't have anyone else wishing to address the board, or no one has received any emails. So I think we're clear to move on. So moving on to action, first up, we have the food service recommendation as presented, and I'll entertain a motion.
So moved.
Support. Support.
We have a motion by Matt Schaffner, supported by Shannon Vanderhyde, to approve as presented. Is there any discussion? Having none, Vice President Schaffner,
Yes.
Secretary Slager,
Yes.
Treasurer Gilmore,
Yes.
Treasurer Vanderhyde,
Yes.
and President Reed, yes. And we did lose Trustee Bowser. I will report the time to the recording secretary due to a computer malfunction. Okay, so we'll move on to the Kent ISD service agreements. I'll entertain a motion for as presented. And we're noting that Kent ISD did not increase their fees for payroll and technology information services.
So moved.
So moved.
We have a motion by Schaffner, supported by Gilmore, to approve as presented. Any discussion? Having none, Vice President Schaffner,
Yes.
Secretary Slager,
Yes.
Treasurer Gilmore,
Yes.
Trustee Vanderhyde,
Yes.
President Reed, yes. Agreements are approved. And Neola policy, before we make the motion, Matt, did you find anything? Or I'll call it as presented.
Call it as presented. I'll talk about it in discussion.
Okay.
And amend it.
All right, so we have Neola policy updates before us, items 1 through 11, and I'll entertain a motion for as presented.
So moved.
Support.
We have a motion by Vanderhyde, supported by Slager, for as presented. Is there any discussion?
Yes. In the transportation, what is it? PO 8600. Hang on. I lost it.
Oh, there it is.
I can share my screen.
It hides.
I have it on my screen. It's the second paragraph. It reads, school buses and student transportation vehicles, whether purchased, leased, or contracted for, maintained by the district. On my reading, it has stricken through shall be, and I think that shall be maintained by the district probably needs to be in there. Otherwise, it's not reading correctly.
I agree with that observation. My thinking is we may want to pull this one off because we don't want to agree to maintain something if that's not how our contract reads for Dean's Transportation.
Correct.
So I will move to amend the proposal to remove the transportation policy change.
Support. Is that how that works?
Yes.
Pam, do you have that? Okay. Any further discussion based on that amendment? Okay. Having none, we have before us the motion to approve the Neola policy as presented. We're taking off item 11, the transportation, for rewording. Are we
Yes.
we good with that? Okay. With that, I'm going to call the roll. Vice President Schaffner,
Yes.
Secretary Slager,
Yes.
Treasurer Gilmore,
Yes.
Trustee Vanderhyde,
Yes.
President Reed, yes, motion carries. That brings us to the Europe trip postponement to 2022. I'll entertain a motion for as presented.
So moved. Or support, whatever.
We have a motion by Vanderhyde supported by Gilmore for as presented for the Europe trip. Is there any discussion? Having none, Vice President Schaffner,
Yes.
Secretary Slager,
Yes.
Treasurer Gilmore, Trustee Vanderhyde,
Yes.
President Reed, yes, motion carries. And our last action item for tonight is the West Michigan Tech Triangle Resolution. I'll entertain a motion for as presented.
So moved.
Support.
We have a motion by Vanderhyde and supported by Slager. Sorry, I'm going to give it to Tracy. Matt. Is there any discussion? Having none. Vice President Schaffner,
Yes.
Secretary Slager,
Yes.
Treasurer Gilmore. Can't hear him, but I'm, yes, okay. Trustee Vanderhyde,
Yes.
President Reed, yes, motion carries. Whew. Okay, got that done. That was a lot. So that brings us to communication. For the Board of Education piece, Pam has informed me that in July, so you can think about it, we're going to be entering into the new board book, which is more virtual and you can follow along, and it has some different ways to display documents with each other and those types of things. So we're going to be moving up in July to that format. So June 22nd will be our last one and our old standard faithful. And I did not ask her if all of our documents roll forward, but I will do that. So I needed to let you know that. So that's my communication piece. And any other communication from the board? I've shared things, little random things that I've gotten from the public. So I've shared those with you throughout the couple weeks we haven't been together. So you know what I know. Anybody have anything else for the board? Okay. All right. We're good. Scott, your communication.
Two things quick. One is just a reminder. I don't know if you're available tomorrow at 2 o'clock, but Chris Glass from the West Michigan Talent Triangle is going to be doing a legislative update designed specifically for Board of Education members. And so if you've got some time in that portion of your afternoon, Chris does a phenomenal job sharing insights in terms of what's happening from both a local perspective, a state perspective, but also from a federal perspective. That webinar is also being recorded, and he'll be sending that out to us, and I'll be sharing that with you as a link to our Red Hawk Weekly this Friday if it doesn't work for you to clue in tomorrow. But if you do have some questions, he'd be able to answer those questions during the webinar. The second thing is we're going to be rolling out our first bond press release announcing virtual community forums in regards to bond updates, and that should hit the post this Thursday if all goes as planned. So the train is leaving the station.
Okay, that's good. All right. So the planning, our Truth and Budget hearing work session is June 22nd, and that starts at 6:15. Note the early time. have to set my phone alarm. I'm just paranoid. I'm not going to get in front of my Zoom screen on time. So that will happen. And that's the end of our business for today. It's been a pleasure. We got through a lot. So we'll see you next time. We stand adjourned.
Well, thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.